Dairy cattle in the U.S. are experiencing an outbreak of bird flu. Cases have been reported in herds across 9 states, and now 2 human cases were detected, one of those in Michigan. This has scientists watching wastewater in both Canada and the U.S. for increased signs of the virus. For more, we're joined by Mike McKay. He's the executive director of the Great Lakes Institute for Environmental Research at the University of Windsor, and he joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning, Amy.
Twice in 1 week.
New record.
I know. We're just going to give you a swipe card to get in here, I think.
Okay.
If you could show up around 3 in the morning, that would be
Okay.
above and beyond.
Note to self.
Okay, I know. How is our wastewater currently being monitored for these viruses?
So, University of Windsor is one of 13 academic institutions in the province of Ontario, part of the Wastewater Surveillance Initiative. We've been doing this since 2020, initially started in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, monitoring SARS-CoV-2. Last year, the initiative expanded to include influenza A and B, as well as RSV, the respiratory syncytial virus. Now, interesting fact, our measurements of influenza A is a general indicator of influenza A. And the circulating avian influenza right now that we're hearing all about in the U.S. Is a subtype of influenza A. So theoretically, we would detect avian influenza in wastewater in Windsor, Essex, or any of the other municipalities we're monitoring using our existing assays.
And have we detected anything yet?
No.
Okay.
No, we've had essentially we're a baseline in terms of our influenza A monitoring. There was a group out of Stanford that published a preprint last month, earlier this month actually, where they showed detection of H5N1, the highly pathogenic avian influenza, in wastewater from several wastewater treatment plants in Texas, where we know there have been infected dairy herds. They were initially just testing their wastewater for influenza A, using the exact same test that we use here at the University of Windsor. You see the seasonal flu period, extending from October, November into January, February. But what alerted them to the possibility of something strange going on was after that seasonal flu period ended, they saw another peak about a month later. And they started to investigate what could that be due to, and then reports started coming out about infected dairy herds, and they developed a specific test to allow them to resolve the avian influenza away from just general influenza A. And they were able to determine that it was avian influenza in the wastewater. Now, in that case, it's likely not due to infected people living within the sewer shed or the catchment, but in those locations, there's permitting allowed that allow discharge of industrial products, including food products. So the hypothesis is that contaminated milk was discharged into those sewer systems and picked up with the wastewater testing.
So that makes things a little murky then, if you can't identify the source.
It does. To my knowledge, we typically do not discharge food products into the wastewater systems in Ontario or in Canada. So it might be a little more straightforward for us if we were to pick up an influenza A signal at an unusual time of the year where it shouldn't be spreading. But it does, even with it being in milk, and if that was the case, at least it alerts you to the presence potentially of avian influenza transmitted across species into mammals in your area.
I find the wastewater testing so fascinating, and I know it first came on our radar during COVID when we were able to sort of see the pandemic weeks before or weeks after to sort of have an idea where it was in our community. How does this open up the world of science from your view?
Right. So, the University of Windsor recently was awarded a project, an award from the Canadian Biomedical Research Fund. Our project is called INSPIRE. It's to develop an integrated pathogen surveillance network that crosses borders, and it's meant to support biomanufacturing and supply chain resiliency in Canada. So we're playing on this idea that wastewater surveillance is a sentinel or an early alert to potential emerging threats that may be circulating, and will allow decision makers to be alerted early and inform them in terms of where they have to move supply chains. Do they have to import raw materials from different places?
How alarmed are you by the bird flu? Do you think testing should ramp up? Should we be concerned? What are you seeing?
So, I mean, the good news right now is that we have no indication of any highly pathogenic avian influenza circulating amongst dairy cattle in Canada, as opposed to the U.S., where I think as of earlier this week, there were 15 dairy herds across the U.S. that were infected, 9 of which were in the state of Michigan. Any dairy cattle that are transported or imported into Canada are tested. So there's a negative testing for HPA1 that needs to be done before, and then they're monitored once they're here. So we do have checks and balances in place. The other good thing is, unlike SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19, that was a new pathogen. Avian influenza, this strain's been circulating since the late 1990s. We have over 7 decades of experience globally in terms of a global influenza surveillance network, 150 national centers, 130 member states, including 5 of which are specifically dedicated to avian influenza. So we have a head start. And we have people actively engaged in this research, and the government of Canada. I was involved in a situational awareness briefing last week by Public Health Agency of Canada, outlining the steps that are being taken in terms of monitoring and surveillance, including wastewater surveillance will be an important piece or important tool in the toolbox.
Thank you so much. We've come a long way in 4 years.
We have come a long way, and one day I'll get back to doing work in the Great Lakes.
Until then, you have a second job right here on Windsor Morning. Thank you so much.